Care, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Today I'll be discussing the big stories with Benjamin Loughnane from conservative think tank The Bow Group, and lots to get across this Monday. Harrowing images of mass graves, reports of repeated rapes and indiscriminate murder of civilians as towns and cities are razed to the ground. The situation in Ukraine is hellish. Again, we are being challenged. Are we doing enough? First, he said no rules were broken. Then he told us he didn't break them. Now, speculation that Boris has been fined are dismissed by Simon Case, who says the world has moved on. But if the Prime Minister has been caught fibbing, is that something we should simply get over? And has COVID ushered in a new way of working? Travel chaos as living with the virus sees a mass of staff absences. Meanwhile, a 4-day working week is being trialled across 60 companies. But do we risk becoming a lazy, inefficient country? Loads to discuss over the next hour. Keep your thoughts coming in. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, Boris Johnson says the discovery of more mass graves outside of the Ukraine capital of Kyiv is sickening. The Ukrainian president says his country won't rest until it's identified those responsible for the atrocities in the capital. Satellite images of a mass grave in the grounds of a church in Bucha have become apparent today. The Kremlin categorically denies any accusations related to the murder of civilians. Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Alexei Goncharo, told GB News he's personally seen evidence of horrendous crimes.
What we saw in liberated areas of Kyiv region is absolutely awful. I've been there personally 2 days, and I saw a number of bodies of killed people. It's a real horror, and it's a real genocide which is committed by Russians and war crimes and by Russian army, because it's not Putin himself who was killing all these people. It was Russian soldiers and officers who did these awful things. And I think that we should call it genocide.
The UK Foreign Secretary has announced £10 million of support for organisations working with survivors of sexual violence in Ukraine. Liz Truss is travelling to Poland to meet with her Ukrainian and Polish counterparts. She's also meeting aid organisations supporting refugees. The Defence Ministry says Russian forces, including mercenaries, are now refocusing their offensive into the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. The International Trade Secretary said the UK must build its green economy to eliminate Russian fuel from our energy mix once and for all. Anne-Marie Trevelyan says it must work now with reliable energy partners to protect our supply chains and steady the global market. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused turmoil in global energy. Philip Dunn, chair of the Environmental Audit Committee, thinks the UK has potential, huge potential, for solar and tidal energy.
Renewable energy has an important part to play, but fossil fuels will need to be there during the transition. And I would like to see us focusing more on on the UK, exploiting remaining UK assets rather than relying on imports from volatile parts of the world.
The government's former ethics chief has reportedly been fined over the Partygate scandal. The Daily Telegraph says that Helen McNamara, who used to be the Deputy Cabinet Secretary, received a £50 fine in connection with a leaving do that was held in the Cabinet Office in June 2020. Well, 20 fixed penalty notices have been issued as part of the police investigation into COVID rule-breaching parties in Westminster. The Prime Minister's spokesperson says Boris Johnson has not been fined. Polling expert Professor Sir John Curtis told us the scandal did not appear to be affecting the Prime Minister's popularity.
At the moment, the call for the Prime Minister to resign has weakened. And the Prime Minister's personal popularity in pretty much now back to where it was before Partygate broke. So I think the crucial thing is what happens if, and of course at the moment it's very, very much an if, the Prime Minister himself becomes a person involved primarily because he in the end faces a fine.
For those heading overseas on the first day of Easter holidays, flights have been cancelled. Cross-channel services have been hit by major delays. Eurotunnel is warning its services to Calais are delayed by 3 hours. British Airways cancelled at least 115 flights today. EasyJet preemptively cancelled 62 flights. They've blamed sickness and staff shortages from COVID. 57 people in the UK have become infected with salmonella in an outbreak that have been linked to Kinder Surprise eggs. 77% of the cases involve children aged 5 and under. The Food Standards Agency said chocolate firm Ferrero is recalling some batches of the eggs as a precaution while investigations continue. More cases have reportedly been recorded in Europe, in Ireland, France, Germany and Sweden and the Netherlands. The eggs are made in Belgium. EastEnders star June Brown, best known for her role as Dot Cotton, has died at the age of 95. A statement from her family confirmed she passed away peacefully at her home in Surrey on Sunday evening. An EastEnders spokesperson says she was loved and adored and will never be forgotten. EastEnders executive producer Chris Clanshaw said her portrayal of Dot Cotton made a huge impact on British television, which not only entertained the nation, but at times changed it a little for the better. You're up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now we'll go back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Another Zelensky box office moment. If one thing has characterised war in Ukraine as a 21st century conflict, it's the president's impassioned appeals via video link from his war-torn nation. A de Gaulle effort, fit for the Zoom era. Having addressed parliaments around the world, never mincing his words, Volodymyr Zelensky's surprise appearance at the Grammys was a literal showstopper.
War doesn't let us choose who survives and who stays in eternal silence. Our musicians wear body armor instead of tuxedo. They sing to the wounded in hospitals, even to those who can't hear them, but the music will break through anyway. We defend our freedom to live, to love, to sound. On our land, we are fighting Russia, which brings horrible silence with its bombs, the dead silence. Feel the silence with your music. Feel it today to tell our story.
But having a gifted performer as president only goes so far, as his heart-wrenching plight echo against a backdrop of atrocity. Indiscriminate murders, starvation, rape and rubberization. Scenes from hell played out as desperate pleas fall on tragically impotent governments. The EU has announced even tougher sanctions, while the UN Security Council will tomorrow discuss Russian war crimes. But I'm sure that's not enough, Zelensky argued. More conclusions must be drawn, not just about Russia, but about the political behaviour that actually allowed this evil to come onto our land, name-checking the past leaders of France and Germany as Putin's enablers. The bigger question is surely whether Europe enables him still. If the EU is able to deploy further sanctions, why haven't they been used already? Cynical economic self-interest prioritised as apocalyptic scenes rip open innocent neighbourhoods. Well, let's speak to Stefan Weichert, who's a freelance journalist based in Ukraine and joins us from Kiev. Stefan, can you tell us more about these accusations of some of the atrocities that are being posted on social media and reported in the press?
Yeah, well, it's really horrible stuff. It is, for example, that the Russian soldiers have simply just rounded up men from these villages and suburbs of Kiev, tied their hands together, and if they have had any connection to the military, have served there previously as veterans of war, or whether they have the wrong tattoo, they have simply been shot out in the open. So it's atrocities like that we are seeing Russia being accused of.
I mean, the Foreign Secretary of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, first of all suggested this didn't happen at all, and then has suggested this is being staged by Ukrainians, even suggestions that some of the corpses that have been filmed could be seen moving. What's been the reaction to that?
In Ukraine, I mean, people are simply just disregarding it. They're saying that this is a Russian attempt, a desperate attempt to hide what has been happening. I mean, we have all seen, for example, that video where supposedly one of the men on the streets is moving his arm, and you can see that it's more of a reflection at that point. But I mean, there's no doubt about that people have been killed openly on the streets. And of course, it's a media war right now between Ukraine and Russia to try to make the most of it. For Ukraine to use this as an attempt to get more sanctions against Russia, and for Russia is trying to disregard it and say that they had nothing to do with this.
Yeah, I mean, discussing that media war, again, President Volodymyr Zelensky addressing an international audience by appearing at the Grammys, no less. But it seems that there's still not enough being done by the West. He's having to constantly appeal for more. Where are we at the moment? The EU, I believe, have just potentially announced a new raft of sanctions with Emmanuel Macron saying he wants to lead the way.
Yeah. It seems like it's Germany, you can say once again, which is the country which is a little bit reluctant and imposing more sanctions at this moment. So that's where we are, right? That there's different voices within the EU to whether, or Europe in general, to whether, new sanctions should be imposed and to what extent. And at the same time, Zelensky is just trying to keep pressuring the Europe, keep, addressing parliaments, as you mentioned earlier, and keep, pointing out these atrocities that's been happening and tying that together and say that the solution to this is more sanctions to hurt the Russian economy. And it is that you also need to keep sending more weapons so that, Ukraine can keep fighting against Russia and in the end, according to Zelensky, will win.
Now, Stefan, I really want to ask how you are doing, because it's remarkable. You have returned to Ukraine, having yourself been shot. How are you feeling? Tell us about that.
I'm doing better and better. I just returned a couple of days ago, and I still, have some recovery to do. So I'm taking it easy, not throwing myself out in similar situations that I've been in before. But I'm doing better and better so far.
We're so grateful for your determination. Remarkable that you have returned, and our thoughts with you. And it's fantastic to have you back on the programme. Do continue your recovery. Stefan Weichert there, freelance journalist in Kiev and a friend of this programme. Well, joining me now is another friend of the programme, Mircea Barbu, who's a journalist and based in Siret, which is on the Romanian-Ukraine border. Mircea, let's return to the accusations of these atrocities and quite how serious they are. We're seeing as Russian troops leave the suburbs of Kiev, a lot of horrible, hellish images left in their wake. The fear now, of course, is that we could well see the same thing in other big cities like Mariupol when the Russians are pushed out of there.
Well, indeed, Alex, this is what the Ukrainians are fearing, that once the Ukrainian army pushes forward into Mariupol or other cities that are currently being occupied by the Russian forces, more and more horrific images will come up and more atrocities will be discovered. But at the moment, the Ukrainian society is simply shocked by these images. Equally as the international community. I was just over the border in Ukraine this morning in Chernivtsi, which is a city just by the Romanian border, and people were glued to their phones. They're just sharing images, discussing with their families and friends. and fearing the worst, fearing that this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to war crimes. But at the same time, one thing that one of the friends here, local journalists, told me is that they are not shocked in a way that they did expect the Russians to behave in a horrific way, because this is historically what they did, at least what this is Ukrainians claiming. They're saying that during World War II, the same happened to their grandparents and parents. People just, Russian forces looting and engaging in horrific human rights violations. So now they're just saying that this is just a continuation of the behavior the Russian army had in this part of the world during World War II.
President Zelensky himself has said he wants to lead the way in documenting these atrocities and ensuring that those responsible in Russia end up in court for war crimes. But what use is that? That doesn't seem to be much of a deterrent for the Russian forces.
Well, Zelensky is leading the efforts on convincing the international community, and at the same time keeping the Ukrainian society together when it comes to the unified response to this aggression, to this invasion. Not sure how practically President Zelensky can lead the way into an investigation, and I'm not sure if this is actually the good thing to do. I think an impartial, neutral international community should be in these areas at the moment, and should conduct an investigation, an independent investigation, because obviously there's a lot of talk about these images, both on the Russian side and on the Ukrainian side, as my colleagues mentioned a few minutes ago. So at the moment, if the Ukrainians really want these crimes to be taken serious into an international court and to have Russia prosecuted for these crimes, they need to allow international independent prosecutors on site in Irpin, in Bucha, and probably in other places as the war continues.
I mean, we understand that it's possible that Russian forces are likely bogged down, that they could be retreating from some parts of Ukraine. We are seeing these horrifying images of how things are now playing out. Tomorrow, the UN Security Council will meet to discuss some of these atrocities and further measures that could be taken. But what are we learning of potential peace talks? Because surely now peace really needs to be found.
Well, peace talks have been on the table and have been on the agenda pretty much every day, at least for the last 2 weeks since I returned to Ukraine. But at the same time, we're not really seeing much peace talk results on the ground. So we hear about it. We as journalists, people here in Ukraine, on the Romanian side of the border, refugees, everyone reads the news about the peace talks. But on the ground, there's not much change or not much result when it comes to these peace talks. We're still seeing an influx of refugees, not as much as it was probably 2-3 weeks ago, for sure 2-3 weeks ago, but we're still seeing people leaving Ukraine, coming to Romania, Poland, Hungary, and many other places. And obviously, even here in Chernivtsi, which is a city across the border, just miles from here, the alarms sounded for the last couple of nights while I was there, a sign that there's still a military invasion taking place even as close as the Romanian/NATO border. So people are not really hopeful when it comes to negotiations. They're not really seeing it on the ground, like I said. But obviously, like you said, there needs to be some sort of coherent answer, and these negotiations should have an impact on the situation on the ground. So far, we're not seeing that.
Mircea, we love your work. It's been fantastic having you back on the show, and I'm sure we'll catch up again very soon. Do stay safe. That's Mircea Barbu, who is a great friend to this programme. Well, joining me now is Benjamin Loughnane, who is the Bow Group's Research Fellow for Migration. Do you know, when I read this morning the EU saying, and Macron swaggering almost, saying, I'm going to make sure there are even more sanctions, this time against oil and gas. I mean, we've all been waiting for that from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I have to ask, and I don't know whether you do, why weren't these in place already? Why does it seem to me that Europe is still dragging its heels on imposing things that could actually unplug a supply chain, at least of finances, to Russia while this is taking place?
Well, it's worth bearing in mind that Macron has an election next week, and I think timing is everything in that regard. He knows that if he sort of plays his hand too early, it won't have the impact in that election. If it happens just before an election, quite a popular decision, I think, in France, it makes him look good, it makes him look like an international statesman, and so on and so forth, standing up to Putin. I mean, it elevates his profile, and with the threat of people from both sides in France, that's what he needs. So I think never underestimate how cynical Macron might be in his decision-making. It's not about saving people or helping people necessarily, it's about saving himself and helping himself.
When we see these horrific images and the tales that we're hearing coming from Ukraine, I mean, some of them are so horrific they can't be spoken about on air, certainly not at this time of day. It does make you wonder why we're not doing enough. And I want to bring this back to the migration situation here in the UK. We're now hearing that you've got men approaching single Ukrainian women saying, I need refuge on social media because our own system doesn't seem to be standing up to the job of helping the tens of thousands of people who have applied for sanctuary here.
Well, absolutely, and you know, one of the other problems that we've got is previously when you've had things like the Channel crossings, this in comparison is a totally different thing. It's women and children. They don't want to stay here. They want to go back because their husbands, their sons, fathers are over fighting in Ukraine. So it's a temporary situation. It's a very different thing. So I think the government needs to find a way of dealing with it differently. They need to classify the two things separately, have a special system for this particular circumstance. And the question is really, how long does that take? And what measures need to be put into place to ensure that you're getting people from Ukraine rather than people coming from wherever else and saying they have come from Ukraine, but they've lost their passport, whatever else. So we need to make sure that the system is rigorous and does function well, but you also need to have some differentiation.
Benjamin, thank you. Well, let's hope some of the reports we're hearing today are a wake-up call. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather from the Met Office. A different feel out there today. It's not as cold as it was, but it is quite a grey day with many of us seeing outbreaks of rain. Here's the reason why. Low pressure up to the northeast with these two weather fronts. In between them, some mild air, but still a lot of isobars across the chart. So it is still a fairly breezy day, and there's an awful lot of cloud around as well, bringing rain at times. Certainly a wet day for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland. The rain a bit patchier elsewhere, and we do have some breaks in the cloud, a bit of sunshine over southeast Scotland, northeast England, and brightening up at times across parts of southern England and South Wales. And if we see a hint of sunshine, temperatures could easily pop up to 14, 15 degrees. So it is quite a bit warmer than it was for much of last week. During this evening, that rain will continue for Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. Again, patchy rain elsewhere, particularly over hills. But again, largely dry across eastern England. Not much rain across the south either. All the cloud keeping the temperatures up. It is going to be a mild night with temperatures well above freezing. 8, 9, 10 degrees the low across the southeast. But cold air isn't far away from the northeast of Scotland, getting colder across Shetland and the mainland. And with the wet weather here, we're going to start to see more snow falling, initially over hills on Tuesday, but coming down to low levels by the end of the day across the far northeast. So that could cause some disruption, quite a bit of snow by the time we get to Wednesday. Wet weather working into Northern Ireland. It'll be rain here, as it will be through the central belt of Scotland. Much of England and Wales, dry and fine tomorrow. We'll see some sunny spells across the south, which could see highs of 16 Celsius. So quite a contrast between north and south during Tuesday, and that will continue as the snow, if anything, gets heavier on Tuesday night across northern Scotland. So there's something, as I say, we need to watch, could cause some disruption. We're going to see showery rain crossing the country during Wednesday. It turns brighter and drier to the end of the week, but colder for all of us.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. Police have now issued fines over the number 10 gathering on the eve of Prince Phillips' funeral. Boris Johnson hasn't confessed to the party allegations throughout the scandal. Just take a look.
What I can tell you is that all the guidelines were observed, continue to be observed, and what I can also tell you is that we're getting on with the job as we have been throughout, of dealing with the priorities of the people, particularly fighting crime.
So was it a party where the guidelines were followed, or was it not a party?
I can tell you that the guidelines were followed at all times.
Well, did you investigate that yourself? Have you satisfied yourself?
I have satisfied myself that the guidelines were followed at all times.
Oh dear, the weasel words of a Prime Minister. Yes, Cabinet Secretary Simon Case may be right. The world has moved on a considerable distance since the nation waited with bated breath to see if Boris would be toppled from power over alleged parties during lockdown. But then came the sickening audacity of Boris telling Tory MPs at a glitzy dinner they should be grateful they don't live in Russia, where Putin has nobody to write 54 letters to Sir Grahamsky Bradysky. Today, we know multiple fines are still being issued to number 10, with the fact Boris was not interviewed by police an indication he himself was a lawbreaker, not an innocent bystander. Now, whatever your views on Partygate, looking back at the Prime Minister's statements since allegations emerged, it is surely irrefutable that he lied. Lied to the media, lied to Parliament, lied to you. Without hesitation, without remorse, brazenly and repeatedly. Does that bother you? Because when it comes to the character of the man leading our country through the worst cost of living crisis in decades, while war erupts in Europe, it bothers me. Well, Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, joins me now. Tom, get us up to speed with where we are with Partygate and fines.
Well, this is the first tranche of fines that we heard about last week. The curious thing about these fines is that they're not made public. The Metropolitan Police say the number of fines that they've asked to be issued, not how many people they go to, but the number of fines. And remember that one individual may receive more than one fine. So we know that 20 were asked to be issued. Those have gone out. And now it's really up to those who have received those fines as to whether they make them public or not. No other authority other than those who issued the fines and those who received them actually know. So the government doesn't know the names of those unless they divulge their names. And one of the people who has is a very senior civil servant, Helen McNamara, who had a leaving do in Whitehall. She has come forward. She actually used to be the ethics czar for the civil service, which is a slight irony there. And of course, the other event that we know fines have been issued for was that party the night before the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh. Of course, both of those occasions that we know have been fined, the Prime Minister was not there. On the occasion of the Friday night before the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prime Minister was away at Chequers, and also that event that Helen McNamara attended, that was in Whitehall, not in Downing Street. So there's a wide set of implications here. I think that the heat is not particularly on the Prime Minister until and unless there is an event that becomes public that the Prime Minister himself attended. If a fine is put out for one of those events, then we get into stickier water. But for now, the Prime Minister sort of sits in this state of suspended animation. The Met Police investigation has not yet concluded. There could be more announcements of more fixed penalty notices going forward into the future. We simply don't know. And then when the Met Police investigation concludes, well, Sue Gray, remember her? She'll come back with a fuller version, an update to her report. Remember, the first report that she issued couldn't contain things that the Metropolitan Police were investigating. Well, when the Met Police finally conclude their investigation, Sue Gray can come forward, and then the Prime Minister makes a statement to the House, and that will likely be the moment of maximum political danger for this Prime Minister.
Now, some other political danger potentially giving the government a headache today is the MP for Frome, David Warburton. Apparently he's been admitted to a psychiatric unit after allegations of sexual assault and drug abuse. Can you tell us about that?
Certainly. Over the weekend, there were some really quite concerning reports, allegations put forward by two individual women who used to work for David Warburton, some with quite really concerning allegations of Mr. Warburton taking his clothes off, wanting to get into bed, getting into bed allegedly with one of his aides who did not want that. There are some texts that have been made public of Mr. Warburton saying, "I will not get naked with you again," asking to meet these women or one of these women again. And also there's a photograph of Mr. Warburton sitting down next to lines of what is alleged to be cocaine. Now, this is someone who has been elected since 2015, has been around in Parliament, is known in Parliament, is an active MP, and many people are quite shocked by these allegations. The whip was suspended as soon as they became public. However, some further details have emerged that MPs actually raised the behaviour and concerns about the behaviour of Mr. Warburton to the whips several weeks ago, and it took until the story became public that the whip was withdrawn. Apparently, Mr. Warburton would be spending more time in Westminster and less time back in the constituency, and this raised some red flags with colleagues. It must be said that he strongly denies all of these allegations and says he will be putting up a spirited defence. His wife is standing by him as well at this time, and of course he has been admitted to a psychiatric institute. That is where we are right now with this story.
Tom, thank you ever so much. Well, we're being bounced into a break, but let me know your thoughts on that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You are, of course, with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up after the break, as the UK's COVID cases hit a record high, I'm asking, is this what living with COVID looks like? But first, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
It's 2:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Boris Johnson says the discovery of more mass graves outside the Ukraine capital of Kyiv is sickening. The Ukrainian president says his country will not rest until it's identified those responsible for atrocities in the capital. For those heading overseas on the first day of Easter holidays today, well, flights have been cancelled and cross-channel services have been hit by major delays. Eurotunnel is warning its rail services to Calais have been delayed by up to 3 hours. British Airways cancelled at least 115 flights. EasyJet preemptively cancelled 62 flights scheduled for today, blaming sickness with COVID for staff shortages. Well, shortness of breath, having an aching body and also loss of appetite, they're 3 of 9 symptoms that have newly been added to the official list of COVID-19 signs of illness. Infection levels have hit a record high in the UK, with almost 5 million people estimated to currently have COVID-19. 57 people in the UK have become infected with salmonella in an outbreak linked to Kinder Surprise eggs. 77% of the cases involve children aged 5 and under. The Food Standards Agency said the chocolate firm Ferrero is recalling some batches of the eggs as a precaution while investigations continue. The EastEnders star June Brown, best known for her role as Dot Cotton, has died at the age of 95. A statement from her family confirmed she passed away peacefully at her home in Surrey on Sunday evening, with her family by her side. An EastEnders spokesperson said she was loved and adored and will never be forgotten. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back to We Need to Talk About, and don't we have a lot to talk about today? This is GBNews and I'm Alex Phillips. A court case is underway in Belfast which seeks to stop any blanket amnesty for cases relating to the Northern Ireland Troubles. That would include soldiers, police officers, as well as terrorist groups. We're now joined by our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, who's following the case. Doogie, what's the background to this?
Well, this case is being taken by Patricia Burns and Daniel McCready, and it's to try and stop the British government putting an end to all these inquests of what happened in the past. Now, it mightn't be a bad thing. We're talking about Ukraine today and all that happened there. Well, the Good Friday Agreement was in 1998, and 60% of the killings in Northern Ireland were done by Republicans, the IRA being amongst the leaders of those. And Tony Blair gave letters of comfort and Queen's pardons of mercy to the IRA, which meant that they will never appear in court, which also means that their victims, their loved ones, will not know what happened to them. So the security forces that were only responsible for 10% of that are being brought back to court to face questions about what their role was in the Troubles. Now, on top of that, the Republic of Ireland weren't spectators in all this mess either, and they had a tribunal, just one, the Smithwick's tribunal, and that was looking at was there collusion between the IRA and the Garda Síochána, the Irish police, if you like. Now, in amongst those deaths was a guy called Ian Sproul, and in that Smithwick's tribunal it was said that Witness 68 pointed out that there was collusion between the IRA and the Garda Síochána. The Sproul family have been trying to meet the Taoiseach for many years, and I questioned him about it on Friday when he was here at a legacy event. Now, he said they had no problems, but later on that night, John Sproul, Ian Sproul's brother, appeared at that event protesting, trying to see him, and just listen to what went on.
And I don't have a difficulty in meeting the Sproul family. And I want to say, I have to be very categorical about this. On the legacy issue, the Irish government stood up to the plate in terms of the Semitic Tribunal, and we saw it through. We started the Semitic Tribunal, and we saw it through. There can be no hiding place, and the government of the Republic will not shelter or protect anybody in respect of any wrongdoing or any violence imposed on anybody. So I really would reject any assertion on that front.
He must have a long diary, because we're going on this years, emails, letters, and he still hasn't met me. If he's able to come here tonight to Northern Ireland, he's going to be able to come to Northern Ireland and meet me and all our families. The collusion come to light, and the Semitic Tribunal, where witness 6 dates said with beyond doubt there was a collusion and my brother's murder. There have been other collusion in the Republic of Ireland, but one door after another being closed, and I'm going to keep this fight up till there must be truth and justice, and no comeback from the Republic of Ireland. What sickens me is they keep chatting about legacy. They're more unable and want to come to Northern Ireland to chat about legacy and blame everybody else. But when it's on their own door, they don't want to talk about it, don't want to meet me, and this must change. Legacy needs to be for everybody, just not the chosen few.
Well, there you are, legacy for everybody, and it's not for everybody. And these cases here are now right in the spotlight. The British government and the British taxpayer, it is costing millions and millions of pounds to bring soldiers and policemen back here. And so far, in all these years, not one conviction.
Dougie, thank you very much for that update. Well, it's a popular time of year to travel, the start of the Easter holidays, not least when there are April showers. But for some British travellers, it's definitely not sunshine and seaside as airlines cancel hundreds of flights and Eurotunnel warns of 3-hour delays. EasyJet and British Airways have put this down to staff absences as COVID infections keep rising. Eurotunnel is meanwhile blaming a broken down train for the delays. Well, Bradley Harris, GBNews North West of England reporter, has more on this and has sent this report from outside Manchester Airport.
Yeah, I'm next to the runway at Manchester Airport, and it's just another day of frustration for hundreds of thousands of passengers who were looking forward to getting away for the Easter school holidays this year. Of course, this is the first time that people will have been able to go away for the Easter holidays since the restrictions for international travel were dropped. Right now, there are still flights operational at Manchester Airport. That's a Ryanair flight that's just landing behind me. I have seen EasyJet flights landing and taking off from Manchester Airport. That's despite cancellations, because at the moment, EasyJet have cancelled 62 flights that were scheduled for today. Plus, if you remember, a further 222 that were cancelled over the weekend. Then take a look at British Airways, a similar picture. 115 flights that were scheduled for today cancelled, and they were due to depart from Heathrow Airport, those British Airways flights. We've also seen at the airports really long queues going into security. Manchester Airport, there's been videos of queues backed up all the way to the car park outside the terminal buildings. If we look at Manchester Airport, they have responded to this and apologised and admitted the passengers' experience fell below the standard we aim to provide. That's what they said. With EasyJet, they've said that as a result of the current high rates of COVID infections across Europe, like all businesses, EasyJet is experiencing higher than usual levels of employee sickness. British Airways, similar statement, saying that they are experiencing the same issues rebuilding their operations while managing to continue the impact of COVID. And that's the problem. There are still people off sick at the moment with COVID. It means that there's hardly any staff on airlines and in airports, causing huge delays for hundreds of thousands of passengers at the moment.
Well, now you see it, now you don't. With COVID regulations dropped, the pandemic has also dropped from headlines, but its impact is still widely felt. Case numbers in recent weeks have been the highest since records began. But the incessant testing and self-isolation is largely a thing of the past. But, as we've just seen, there's major disruption to flights due to staff testing positive. So is this what living with COVID is going to be like? A succession of vaccines alongside compromised services? Or has the pandemic expedited a new way of working that we must adapt to, with home offices and now a pilot scheme for a 4-day working week? Are we hurtling towards becoming a lazy, inefficient nation? Or are these changes inevitable with increasing automation and a focus on work-life balance? Well, the way we work may have changed forever. The question is, has it changed for the better? Well, joining me first is Jamie Jenkins, who's a statistician and political commentator. Now, Jamie, we were told that we were going to be now living with COVID. Case numbers are higher than ever before. While some people are testing positive, maybe asymptomatic and not doing anything about it, there still seems to be an impact. I mean, certainly the headlines today are suggesting that. So what do you think it's going to look like going forward? Is this it? Is this what we've become?
Well, no, I don't think it's going to be like we've got at the moment forever, Alex. I think we're in that kind of period where the government have dropped all of the legal requirements to self-isolate, but there's been kind of millions and millions of lateral flow tests built up over the last 6 to 12 months, and people are still doing a lot of lateral flow tests. They stopped becoming free on Friday. And if you look at what the government issued, I think a few days ago, they updated the number of symptoms that people may have if they've got COVID. They're so wide-reaching that, a lot of people may think that they've got COVID. But going forward, I think there are probably people, you've done the reports, you were looking at there in terms of public services or airports and things. People are probably self-isolating now because they've done a lateral flow test that's come back positive. Whereas in the past, they might have similar symptoms and would have gone to work because they would have thought it was as a cold. So I think the important thing is that whilst we got high numbers of infections, and they are actually highest if you look at the ONS figures in Scotland, where they still have masks in some places there, I think as we go forward, we are seeing that fewer and fewer people will self-isolate if they test positive, or they won't know they'll test positive in the future, Alex, because there'll be no testing available for them.
Well, here's my question about that. What we know, what we think we know, is that COVID has mutated to become far more transmissible, as viruses often do. Yes, people are potentially having lateral flows and staying off work, but a great deal of the population may not be doing that. But does this therefore require us to just keep on having booster after booster after booster to prevent the so-called strain on the NHS, where people might get very ill from this?
Well, the stories you see, Alex, about rising numbers of patients in hospital, you've got to look underneath the key headlines on that, in that we're actually seeing that the vast majority of patients in hospital now test positive on admission, and they're not the primary reason for being admitted is COVID. And the number of patients who are seriously ill in hospital, so in kind of your critical care and ventilated beds, that's hardly moved at all. So if we're going to continue to test, and they're going to test patients as they go in, we're not seeing a huge strain of COVID causing that extra problem. It does cause an issue if obviously staff are off sick and they can't provide that care, which does have that impact. In terms of the booster rollouts, what we do know is that we're seeing a big rise in older patients going into hospital, and that's in part because the vaccines tend to wane after 10 to 12 weeks. So it's a success of the vaccine that they kept them out of hospital at Christmas time, but a failure of the vaccine that they need to have another one. Now, I think as we move forward, I don't think booster after booster after booster is going to be needed for everybody. We do need better vaccines that last longer. And I think we're going to get back to where we were with the flu, Alex, where you vaccinate the most vulnerable and let the rest of the population just catch this virus and let the little immune system get it over it and back to normal in a few days' time.
Now, to you, as a statistician, does this cast any retrospective light on government policy to date? Were we perhaps way too zealous and heavy-handed in the way we handled COVID? Perhaps not at the beginning, when we didn't really understand the length and breadth of it and the real risk, but certainly, over the last year or so, where there have still been a lot of regulations in place.
Well, indeed, you still got masks in place in some settings in Scotland. We've had a report out from Ofsted today, Alex, saying that young kind of children, before they even go to primary school, all the mask wearing has had an impact in terms of their learning, because they haven't been seeing kind of people's faces in those early years settings. And that's had an impact as well, which you're going to have to kind of live with. And the reports coming out of China, where they're segregating children from their parents with these stringent lockdowns, these zero COVID policies that some parts of the world have have tried to kind of contain the virus over the last couple of years is clearly not working with Omicron. I think going forward, Alex, people will always call for more restrictions because some people have got used to them. Remember, some people who work in kind of in offices can work from home, but a vast majority of people actually do not work in these offices, and they're just going to need to kind of get over the fact that you can't continue to self-isolate if you've got the virus. Otherwise, we're just going to be testing and going into an isolation back and forth all of the time, and it's just not going to be tenable in the future.
Jamie Jenkins, statistician there, and brilliantly segueing into how we're going to move on this debate as we are now joined by Christopher Snowdon, who's the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Now, Christopher, it seems to me very much that COVID has ushered in a whole new way of working where perhaps we've become a little too used to working from home and being able to put a load of washing on and have EastEnders on repeat in the background or whatever it is that people do when they're purportedly doing their daily job. And we're now having a trial about a 4-day working week. This, to me, personally, smacks of laziness in a country that will essentially grind to a halt if we don't pull our socks up. What do you think?
Well, it's very easy to exaggerate the kind of work-from-home revolution. If you look at the statistics, the number of employees who worked from home at any point in 2019 was 27%. And in 2020, the first year, obviously, of the pandemic, that only went up to 37%. So quite a big relative rise, but we're still only talking about a minority of workers, a large minority, but still a minority. And, most people simply can't work from home, certainly not all the time. So when you get this idea of the 4-day working week, it sounds quite appealing. It sounds quite appealing to me. The problem is that you're going to have to probably take a pay cut in order to do it. People's pay, of course, is directly linked to their productivity, or certainly should be. I think it's a public sector, part of the public sector is talking about this 4-day week. In this particular instance. So for some people, if they work in an office and they're not flat out, there is some evidence actually that it doesn't make a lot of difference if you go down from 5 days to 4 days, which says a bit about the job you're doing. But for most people, I mean, if you work in a factory, if you're a farmer, if you're a postman, if you do most jobs, in fact, then if you work 20% less, then you are 20% less productive, and therefore you're going to get paid 20% less. People can work part-time at the moment, of course, and lots of people do. But in actual fact, there's always more demand for people to go from part-time to full-time than go in the other direction. That's because people don't want to take a pay cut. That's the trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, alarm bells went off in my head when you said that, largely working from home seems to have afflicted the public services and as a result seems to be afflicting the general public. Certainly from where I'm standing, I get the distinct impression that stuff just doesn't work as well as it did before because people maybe have become a little bit work shy and a little bit too used to having a bit more leisure time at home. Do you think I'm justified in thinking that?
I'm not too sure. I mean, I think you have to accept that there is still a lot of people, I was actually just talked about with the item there about the NHS, there are people who are genuinely ill with COVID. COVID infections are at an all-time high at the moment. This isn't going to continue. This is, to answer a question you asked a few minutes ago, this isn't the new normal. This is a big spike in infections. And I don't think we're going to be, seeing it, well, we're definitely not going to be seeing it at that kind of level. There's just not enough people in the country. So at the moment, and for, much of the last 2 years, we had people with legitimate reasons to be off work. I'm a little bit concerned that by expanding the list of official COVID symptoms so much that you're giving people a license to skive off for several weeks each year, every time they're feeling a bit tired or what have you. But I think most people will use common sense. And also, the end of mass free testing doesn't mean the end of testing. And you can get a lateral flow test now for as little as 99p. I would hope that most people would consider it worth spending 99p to make sure they're not infecting their colleagues with what is still, for a very small number of people, potentially a lethal virus.
Christopher, we love having you on the show. We love your pragmatism. I'm talking on behalf of me and I'm sure the viewers as well. The inimitable Christopher Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Well, let's go back to Benjamin Loughnane from the Bow Group. I mean, I worry that this 4-day working week, who doesn't want that? I'd love it. But isn't it not going to create some sort of two-speed society where it's great for those who can do that, but for those who have to go out and work long hours, 5 days a week, and actually get off their sofas and go to a place of work, it all feels a bit unfair.
Yeah, and I think it primarily, if it happens, it will be happening in the public sector. It won't be happening in jobs which have a huge profit incentive, because the people who are willing to work 5 days will just be more, they'll just be more efficient than people who work 4 days. So they'll keep their jobs, they'll have high job security, they'll be more likely to not be made redundant if it's ever necessary for redundancies to be made. Whereas in the public sector, you get sort of civil servants currently who claim they've got long COVID and they've been off for months at a time, still on full salary, unfireable, and that's taxpayer money being wasted on people who are effectively malingering for months on end because they've got a foggy haze and other vague symptoms which are, you know, immeasurable and entirely based on their own personal reporting of, oh, I've got this long COVID from when I had COVID 2 years ago, so I can't go back to work. I think there is a sense of people not really wanting to work, wanting to get paid, wanting to, you know, have their happy time at home, which they've been having during lockdown. And there is a portion of society, I think, which really enjoyed lockdown. Most of us found it awful. Most of us suffered a great deal as a result of it, but there is a small group of people who are almost like an aristocracy of people who are getting paid and supported by ordinary hard-working people and taxpayers while they sit around at home with their, you know, their dog that they got during lockdown and their banana bread and all the rest of it, all the things they picked up during lockdown, and they want that lifestyle to continue forever. For the rest of us, we don't want it.
Yeah, I'm sure that, you know, there are people who genuinely suffer long COVID, and my heart goes out to them because it must be dreadful. But it does seem to me that you're right. That I don't know if you feel that things are sort of beginning to grind to a halt, that if you want to speak to the tax office, it takes that much longer. And yeah, there are people genuinely off sick, but I do worry that we're backsliding into a totally lazy, inefficient, feckless nation.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of it is in the public sector. One of the things I've found awful is trains. On Sundays, it's just half the trains are cancelled. Over the weekend, you get barely any. During the weekdays, they just cancel them randomly as well. It's sort of, there is a sense that everything has just become a little bit worse and everything's become a little bit less efficient. And there was a time, you know, 2 years ago before all of this started, where, you know, things were sort of ticking along at a certain pace. Everyone was expected to work in a certain way. People were expected, you work 5 days a week, 9 to 5. You don't pull sickies, you know, maybe you do it once or twice in a cheeky way, but you don't just take months on end off work or just decide that you're going to work a 4-day week or just take every Friday off. I think everyone has become a little bit less hard-working and a little bit less motivated. And there is a sense now that businesses can just say, due to the pandemic, we're not running services today. Well, what pandemic? It's over, move on, you know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thanks for the Monotron, really enjoyed that. Benjamin Loughnane, it's been a pleasure having you in the studios. And don't worry, I'll be here for 5 days running. That's my life, isn't it? You don't want to see me in my pyjamas presenting from the sofa, believe me, it's not a pretty sight. That's about all I have time for now, but join me again for We Need to Talk About Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey, but first, it's time for the weather forecast. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather from the Met Office. A different feel out there today. It's not as cold as it was, but it is quite a grey day with many of us seeing outbreaks of rain. Here's the reason why. Low pressure up to the northeast with these two weather fronts. In between them, some mild air, but still a lot of isobars across the chart, so it is still a fairly breezy day, and there's an awful lot of cloud around as well, bringing rain at times. Certainly a wet day for western Scotland, Northern Ireland. The rain a bit patchier elsewhere, and we do have some breaks in the cloud, a bit of sunshine over southeast Scotland, northeast England, and brightening up at times across parts of southern England and South Wales. And if we see a hint of sunshine, temperatures could easily pop up to 14, 15 degrees. So it is quite a bit warmer than it was for much of last week. During this evening, that rain will continue for Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. Again, patchy rain elsewhere, particularly over hills. But again, largely dry across eastern England. Not much rain across the south either. All the cloud keeping the temperatures up. It is going to be a mild night with temperatures well above freezing. 8, 9, 10 degrees the low across the southeast. But cold air isn't far away from the northeast of Scotland, getting colder across Shetland and the mainland. And with the wet weather here, we're going to start to see more snow falling, initially over hills on Tuesday, but coming down to low levels by the end of the day across the far northeast. So that could cause some disruption, quite a bit of snow by the time we get to Wednesday. Wet weather working into Northern Ireland. It'll be rain here, as it will be through the central belt of Scotland. Much of England and Wales, dry and fine tomorrow. And we'll see some sunny spells across the south, which could see highs of 16 Celsius. So quite a contrast between north and south during Tuesday, and that will continue as the snow, if anything, gets heavier on Tuesday night across northern Scotland. So there's something, as I say, we need to watch, could cause some disruption. We're going to see showery rain crossing the country during Wednesday. It turns brighter and drier to the end of the week, but colder for all of us.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.